On today's World Insight, diplomacy amid simmering tensions, a Zurich meeting between a senior Chinese diplomat and the U.S. National Security Advisor. What's on the agenda? And the HKSAR chief executive lays down in a policy speech the roadmap for the region's future on security and infrastructure. We take a closer look.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We begin today's program with the diplomatic efforts to shore up China-U.S. relations. Senior Chinese and American officials are meeting in Switzerland on Wednesday. The Chinese delegation is headed by Yang Jiechi, who is the director of the Office of Foreign Affairs Commission of the CPC Central Committee and a member of the Politburo of the CPC Central Committee. They landed in Zurich to meet with the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. It will be the first face-to-face meeting since their Alaska summit in March. Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden agreed to the meeting in a phone call last month. President Xi of China said China and the U.S. need to show broad vision and shoulder great responsibilities, adding the two countries should look ahead and press forward, demonstrate strategic courage and political resolve, and bring China-U.S. relations back on track for the good of both countries and all around the world. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden said the ties between the U.S. and China is the most consequential relationship in the world, and the future will depend on how well the two would get along. So, what can we expect from the meeting in Zurich? Let's ask our panelists. For more on the China-U.S. relations and the latest meeting, joining us in Memphis, Dr. Joseph Gregory Mahoney, professor of politics with East China Normal University. Now he's living in the U.S. In Beijing, Rong Ying, vice president of CIIS, the China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. I want to start by asking Professor Mahoney, what can we expect? We haven't got any news coming out of the expected meeting.
Well, you know, we are seeing more engagement with the two presidents talking and recent reports of military and trade officials either meeting or planning to meet. So the trend presently suggests more meetings, perhaps culminating in a summit with the two presidents, which I think Biden is a little more open to at this point, but Xi Jinping is waiting to see more improvement in the relationship. But we know that the Chinese and U.S. political calendars in the coming months and next year will make both sides more cautious, and the potential for new problems remains large. So hopefully the talks will continue. These talks in Zurich will be positive and find some common ground, and perhaps we'll see some old problems resolved and new ones prevented.
Wow, you're quite optimistic. Mr. Rong, do you think you will be as optimistic as Mr. Mahoney?
Yeah, I think we are hopeful that as the meeting is taking place at the following the agreement of the for two leaders, and there are certainly expectations that meetings at that level would be significant and hopeful in the sense that it will lead even higher interactions. And the speculations are that possibly President Xi and President Biden might be meet sometime, and if not in person, but it can be also in virtually, as we are expecting. There are some big events, the G20, the COVID, the COP26, climate change summit, things like that. So we are hopeful. And we are hopeful in the sense that the relationship is so important, the relationship is so consequential, and the exchanges and the meetings like that would lead to some concrete and specific efforts to stabilize
we have been
this
seeing,
relationship.
yeah, we have been seeing a series of events taking place over the past few weeks, to say the few. For example, Meng Wanzhou's coming back home to China, and also we've seen the trade representative of the U.S. talking about quote-unquote re-engagement with China. Of course, some of these are just gestures, others are mainly just phrases that you can interpret in different ways. But is there a message that both sides are trying to send positively to one another and to the rest of the world, Professor Mahoney?
Well, you know, it was certainly a positive sign when Meng was released, but let's be clear, the last thing Biden wanted was to see her face trial in the U.S. because she was unlikely to be convicted and would instead be viewed globally as a political prisoner and martyr. So the fact that it took so long to release the extradition request is shameful, and I have to guess that the real objective here was to spoil relations further between China and Canada. Second, you know, the AUKUS agreement and the Quad summit were major steps backward, as well as the U.S. stoking tensions with Taiwan in recent months. So the Meng resolution and I think the Tai speech are small gives amid many large takes. And in these cases, I'm a little bit more pessimistic than optimistic.
What about the trade reps talk recently? Quote-unquote re-engagement.
Well, yeah, I think the word that was being used is recoupling, and that's a marvelous word. But, you know, she didn't give very many specifics. Yeah, she didn't give very many specifics. And instead, there was a lot of political theater about how tough the U.S. was going to be and how it was really going to hold China to the Phase 1 deal. So, you know, I think everyone is still scratching their heads about what she was really saying. But I do think it was a positive step, but not yet substantial, and certainly one that the Biden administration can hedge on without having made any real commitments yet that might expose Biden to criticism from Republicans.
So here is an interesting thing, Mr. Rong. Are we seeing just gestures on the surface? Well, under the water, there are still a lot of actions by both sides toward one another and suspicions about one another. Mr. Rong?
I think this relationship is really complicated. From the Chinese perspective, I think we're very much looking forward to have a stable relationship. President Xi, in his phone conversation with President Biden, I think he made very clear it is a kind of a question that China and the United States has to answer. There's no choice, and has to provide a good answer for the sake of the bilateral relationship and the world at large. The question is that, as you rightly said, that there are so many things happening, both negatively but to some extent positively, as we have seen. But how far and how much we can go is a big question. The Chinese made it very clear it wants the U.S. to go along with, meet them halfway, and to, while properly manage the differences, but more importantly, to tap the positive side so that the relationship could be bring back to the right track. But I understand it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. You know, earlier we played a little bit footage from the Alaska meeting. Everybody remember how dramatic it was. And since then, we haven't seen things bounce back much until the two presidents talked to one another, and more positive messages seem to be coming out after that. But, you know, one thing is very interesting to many of us, you know, just how important will the phone conversation the two presidents have on some of the fundamental issues, such as the issue of Taiwan? That to China is an extremely principal issue. Mr. Rong, I want to go to you about that and talk about the importance of it to China.
Indeed, I think the Taiwan question is the most important and the most sensitive issue for the bilateral relationship between China and the United States. Over the past 5 decades, we have seen that if this relationship is properly handled, then the relationship would be, if this question is properly handled, then the relationship will be able to go and develop smoothly.
Okay,
and
Mr. Rong, then I have to interrupt you, because what exactly is, quote unquote, properly handled, the Chinese version at least?
The Chinese made it very clear. I think there are principles, the One China principles, that has been enshrined in the three communiques, United States
Which
and
is?
China. Three communiques. The communiques for the Shanghai communique, the communique for the establishment of a diplomatic relationship, and
Right.
more importantly, the relationship we call the August 17th agreement, which the United States explicitly pledged that it would manage this issue properly by reducing the arms sales to Taiwan, both in quantity and quality. Unfortunately, these pledges are not being sort of honored. More
Okay.
importantly, we have seen they have repeatedly been sort of banded, and now we have seen the tension and the anger and that from the Chinese side. That's why I think when the Chinese raised the issues, and I think when President Biden raised the issue that they have their kind of agreement that the Chinese side would like the United States to honor the
Okay,
pledges.
President Biden recently in his interaction with the press was talking about this quote-unquote Taiwan agreement. Of course, there's nothing called Taiwan agreement in terms of document, but rather various documents, as Mr. Rong earlier illustrated from the Chinese side at least, see how the issue of Taiwan should be properly handled. Professor Mahoney, how much do you see Washington will abide by what China sees as really the Taiwan, the One China principle?
Well, you know, the U.S. keeps reiterating its commitment to it, but the commitment seems rather tepid because, in fact, the U.S. has long played a game where it puppets Taiwan, where it encourages friction and then assures peace. And, you know, there are a couple of problems with this. First, the U.S. likes to promote the idea of Taiwanese democracy, but then likes to keep Taiwan under American control. And second, Washington's ability to actually control Taiwan is arguably less and less. So although I don't believe anyone on any side actually wants war, constantly flirting with it is grossly irresponsible.
Another question, very important. We see the G20 summit coming up. We see, you know, the COP16 for biodiversity, the first phase conference is taking place very soon, later in October. We also see at the end of October, there's going to be the Glasgow meeting on climate change. We also see a lot of issues regarding, you know, how should we do this energy transition? How are we going to deal with the pandemic? A lot of global issues facing China and the United States together. But the question really is, will China and the U.S. get themselves together, be able to handle the issue and show the rest of the world they can make things happen? Mr. Rong.
Yeah, that's exactly, I think, what President Xi meant to say by I think, calling upon the U.S. side to work together with China for the sake of the world. I think these global issues has a very track on these global issues. I think China and the U.S. in the past years have a very strong track record of cooperation. Unfortunately, the past years, particularly the previous administration, there have been, I think, the U.S. For the sake of its own pursuing its own sort of American first doctrine, and it has simply, I think, undermined that spirit and create a big problem. And also blaming China for the failure of the U.S. That's why I think as we look ahead for these two important events, if the China and the U.S. can work along this line by continue the spirits that have been helped the stabilize the country, the relationship, I think it would be. We can certainly have some sense of optimism.
A lot of expectations, Professor Mahoney, but will those expectations be realized?
Well, you know, these points should be focuses, as well as, you know, better economic cooperation. And perhaps we'll see some positive movement on the trade war, despite Ty's recent OPEC remarks. I'm a bit pessimistic on climate change cooperation, despite this being the most obvious area for the two countries to work together, because it's not yet clear the U.S. is really sincere about its future commitments, and it hasn't actually accomplished much yet under Biden after significant reversals under Trump. Now, with the global pandemic response, this is still highly politicized, not just globally, but also in the U.S. I'd love to see more American leadership on the outbreak internationally, but this seems fanciful given the fact that U.S. leadership in America itself is insufficient. Now, on other issues like Afghanistan, I don't think we should expect any cooperation. The U.S. thinks it's washed its dirty hands on this matter, but strategically probably wouldn't mind seeing China get messy.
Always very interesting situations. Joseph Mahoney, Rong Ying, gentlemen, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. After talking about the politics and the geopolitics, now let's focus more on the trade aspect. The Biden administration's strategy in fixing trade ties with China comes into clearer focus, some say. U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai said on Monday that the United States seeks, quote, frank conversations with China on issues including ways to carry out Phase 1 trade deal and national industrial policies. Tai said that the Biden administration needs to, quote, take a new, holistic, and pragmatic approach to dealing with the trade relationship with China, while saying it will work with allies and like-minded partners towards building, quote, truly fair international trade, and vowing to defend, quote, American economic interests from harmful policies and practices with old and new tools. Last week, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said that China and the U.S. trade relations are in essence mutually beneficial and should be win-win, and both sides stand to lose in the trade war. China does hope the U.S. will respect the market economy principles and international trade rules toward healthier ties with China. Relations between the world's two largest economies also weigh heavily on global trade and international organizations like WTO, which marks 20th anniversary for China's accession into the WTO this year. So what will China and the U.S. trade ties moving toward to? Let's ask our panelists. For more on China-U.S. trade relations, joining us in Washington, D.C., Jeffrey Shaw. Good to see you, sir. Long time no see. A senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics. In Beijing, Liu Baocheng with us in the studio, Dean from the Center for International Business Ethics from University of International Business and Economics. Good to see you as well, Professor Liu. Let me start by directly asking Mr. Shaw, what messages do you think the trade rep carried during her speech? How would you interpret all these new phrases, for example, recoupling?
Well, I think there is a concern that the situation not get any worse. But it is very difficult to unravel some of the problems that festered during the Trump administration. And so I think essentially what Ambassador Tai is going to be saying is, this is where we stand. This is what we need to do. But we know that the road to get there is going to be very difficult, but let's start talking.
Zigzagging road, let's start talking. That's not a bad idea, isn't it, Mr. Schott? Let's get starting talking too, Professor Liu. What's your take of all these new phrases? How is China assessing the latest messages?
Well, I think it is really received with a moderate positive attitude from China's side, because at least this is not going to further deteriorate, given the suspension that was hanging there for 9 months, because China did expect that the Joe Biden administration would really alter some of the worst policies that are hurting both of the countries and the global economy, but nothing really had been done over the last 9 months. And despite of all the rhetorics, the There are not really a lot of specifics, though. And the fact that China has gained more confidence over the past 2 more years because the interdependence is there. There has never been decoupling, due to the, it's not really in compliance with what the politicians would say. The fact, and also the consumers and business people would would disallow the decouple itself. So therefore, recoupling is expressing the intention from the political side, but decouple never happened in actuality.
Interesting. So you think the politicians are trying to at least come up with a more accurate word for the reality?
That's right.
All right, then. Let's go to Mr. Shah. Talk about phase 1. China-U.S. trade deal. There were a lot of explanations in the U.S. trade rep's speech about what U.S. has in hand. If China doesn't do so, what would be the punishment? And what stakes does the U.S. have in hand as well toward China? But overall speaking, how do you see the nature of this phase 1 trade deal between China and the United States? At this point, there are a lot of circumstances that are changing. So what does it take to implement?
Well, the phase 1 deal was accepted by both sides for different reasons, but I think the expectations on both sides was that it was destined to fail. There was no way to accomplish the goals that both sides had in the deal, but it was a way to avoid a deterioration in further deterioration in the trading relationship, because it would take a while to get the data to see how much trade was being increased and whether any policies of the Chinese government were being revised. Clearly, the achievements are below the inflated targets that were set in the agreement that were agreed by both sides. And so one has to accept that there's going to be complaints that the deal has not been lived up to.
The deal was to be accomplished at the end of the year. Professor Liu, same question to you. First of all, circumstances have been changing since the deal was struck. Secondly, how do we expect from now until the end of the year, how much politics and geopolitics will pave the way for the accomplishing the goals of the deal?
Well, I think it's very realistic that the USTR, either they haven't done a very thorough review with regard to the figures, or simply they do not really pay a great attention to the specific figures because there are so many reasons that deter the full implementation of this agreement in terms of the quantity. However, we do see that there is going to be more talks and from the U.S. side, but from the Chinese side, there could be really different agenda. China would really like to use, actually, Catherine Tai's word, a holistic approach to address not only the trade issues, but many other issues in a basket, because relationship will not really dance on a single leg. Before we talked about cooperation in climate change, and that was already an occasion for China to express its attitude. And hopefully, Catherine Tai will come up with really what she elaborated as new, the holistic and pragmatic approach for frank dialogue, and also to bring some concrete measures to repair the relationship over there.
Mr. Shah, we know that today Yang Jiechi and Sullivan are meeting in Switzerland. Now, that's following the directions of the top leaders of the two countries. How much do you see politics is likely to be evolving? Almost the same question to you, so that it will pave the way for businesses to happen on a better path, shall we put it that way?
Well, I think there are political constraints on both sides, but the one opening and where there's an immediate need for the two presidents to work more closely together, and therefore to prepare for a meeting for them to work together, is in the area of climate change. And this is an area where it's in the interest of both the United States and China to cooperate with each other and to help lead global efforts at decarbonization. And it means that some of the trade issues that continue to vex bilateral commercial relations are going to continue. Some of the problems are going to continue. But I think they will be managed. But we won't see great relief from the tariffs that impair bilateral trade.
Well, we are talking
and have for several years.
Yeah, Mr. Shaw, you are a trade expert, and you have been doing a lot of research over the decade into multilateral trade issues. You know that China has already working with the Japan, South Korea, together with ASEAN countries into the RCEP, likely to be all approved by governments by the end of this year. Meanwhile, China applied for CPTPP, and at the same time, this year celebrates 20 years of China's accession into the World Trade Organization, a big thing for China, and also demonstrate a China-U.S. cooperation, 20 years ago. So, Mr. Shaw, how do you see China now working on the multilateral trade platforms, and what does that mean for China-U.S. trade? As you know, ASEAN already become China's biggest trading partner rather than the United States.
Well, you're right. RCEP will be enter into force probably early next year. But the WTO faces its ministerial meeting at the end of November, and the keys to success of that meeting will be starting a new initiatives to deal with trade and health and trade and climate. And this is really ready-made for improved U.S.-China cooperation, where both sides can take a leadership role to co-responsible stakeholders, if you can, to coin a phrase, and lead the WTO forward. On the CPTPP, it's encouraging that China wants to meet the high standards of that agreement. I think it's going to take a very long time to negotiate, and there are major areas where China still falls short of CPTPP standards.
Of course, the U.S. is not necessarily a party of that either at this point. Professor Liu, how do you see, multilateral platforms, China's role and the U.S. take, and how would that work into this bilateral, very interesting and evolving trade relationship?
Well, I think the fundamental issue is that for the two biggest economies, they want to be open, they want cooperation, but the fact that China demands equal participation and with respect, and this is something that is not completely accepted by the U.S. side. And China itself, shows that we are resolved to work out our own economy, and we are doing a good job in fighting against the COVID-19. And now we really wanted to play a constructive role in the regional integration process by joining more of those platforms. And more importantly, I think China is committed to live up to the requirement of those standards by refraining itself over a number of issues, for example, supporting the state-owned enterprises by also elevating the protection of intellectual property rights and further openness, market access, etc. So this is really a commitment. Much is wait to be seen. What is really the U.S. is really extending more specifics to China.
Before we go, very brief question for both of you, gentlemen. We see that politics sometimes decoupling with the trade realities and business ties. Are we going to see further deepening of those decoupling, quote unquote, or are we going to see some kinds of coming back to the common sense eventually? Let's just say for the rest of the year and for the coming year. We can't predict much from now, but what about the next year? Mr. Shaw, briefly.
I think you're going to see a deepening of the decoupling in a narrower field of commercial relations, particularly in the high-tech sector, where export controls, re-export controls are going to be more narrowly defined, but implemented. So that's going to be the area of decoupling and hopefully some re-engagement on the trade side.
Professor Liu, your judgment.
Yeah, the three C's will play out with a clear picture.
What does the three C's mean?
With regard to cooperation, competition, and confrontation. And hopefully the confrontational side can be really narrowed. And only by working together, we can really prevent the confrontation. And actually, many of those purportedly confrontation actually come from the myopia of many of those politicians. I hope this is really a good learning process.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeffrey Shaw, Liu Baocheng. I'm so happy to have both of you once again, at least in one panel. The two sides are talking to one another. At least the trade experts are. They better learn. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Coming up, Hong Kong SAR chief executive lays down in a policy speech that the roadmap for the region's future on security and infrastructure. A closer look after a few reminders. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Hong Kong SAR chief executive Carrie Lam laid down a roadmap for the region's future in her 2021 policy speech at the Legislative Council's meeting on Wednesday. She said the Hong Kong SAR has got back on the right track under the principle of one country, two systems. For Hong Kong's long-term prosperity and stability, Lam said, each and every Hong Kong resident should have a deeper understanding of one country, two systems to safeguard national security and to take pride in their country and in their Chinese identity while striving hard to bring Hong Kong's unique strengths into full play within national development. Let's take a listen.
In contrast to 2 years ago on the same occasion, when the Legislative Council chamber was disrupted and paralyzed by members who were anti-China and even causing chaos in Hong Kong in an attempt to subvert the state power, today I can peacefully stand before you to deliver this policy address, and all LegCo members can solemnly perform their constitutional function to receive the policy address of the Chief Executive. This is a clear manifestation that the Hong Kong SAR has got back on the right track of one country, two systems, and that governance has returned to normal under the protection of the national security law and the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong. For Hong Kong's long-term prosperity and stability, each and every Hong Kong citizen should have a more comprehensive understanding of one country, two systems, safeguard national security with greater loyalty, and take pride in the development of our country and our Chinese identity, while striving hard to bring Hong Kong's unique strengths into full play to better integrate into the overall national development.
Latest on Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, we have Lawrence Ma, a barrister who's the chairman of the Hong Kong Legal Exchange Foundation. In Beijing, Victor Gao Zhikai, current affairs commentator, who is the vice president of the Center for China and Globalization. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Mr. Ma responds latest from Hong Kong about the policy speech.
Well, I think there are four major points to take from that policy address. First is national security. Second is the northern metropolis. The third point is cultural exchange. And the fourth point being housing supply. And these four major points actually are the main attractions of the entire policy address.
In the speech, though, Carrie Lam announced that Hong Kong is building a 300 square kilometers area in northern part of the city, which can be used for both residential and industrial purposes. We want everyone to listen to this. It's an important message.
In the metropolis, the multifunctional land uses with a highly concentrated residential and working population and enterprises can drive the economic development in its neighboring areas. It is lively and attractive with radiant effect, and its people enjoyed enriched lives in a unique spatial context with iconic nature, human civilization, and building landscapes.
That is in northern part of the city of Hong Kong. Now, Mr. Ma, tell me more about what does that mean in terms of Hong Kong seeking its ways to improve common people's lives?
Well, of course, housing supply is very important because Hong Kong is a very small city with a lot of mountains in it. and therefore, and the population is really dense. Population comes from all over internationally, from all over the place. So, but the problem with Hong Kong is there are so many rural lands that has been underdeveloped, and now the government is proposing this housing plan that it has already found 700 hectares of land to build just over 300,000 public housing units in the coming 10 years, and to combine that with private housing, the government actually estimated that there will be close to 400,000 to 500,000 supplies of residential units in the short term. So that would hopefully resolve our housing problems.
Improve people's livelihood, that's an important thing for the Hong Kong SAR government. Mr. Gao, how do you see the Hong Kong SAR government over the past few years, despite the challenges that the chief executive have been illustrating in her speech, trying to achieve that goal? What is the result so far, you see?
Well, first of all, I think Carrie Lam made a very solid speech today, very much focusing on the substantive issues before the people in Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong does have lots of problems, especially in the housing condition for quite a number of lower income population in Hong Kong, very crowded, and the living conditions probably cannot be worse compared with any other highly developed cities. So this is a major problem facing the Hong Kong SAR government, and as Carrie Lam emphasized today in her speech, this will be a very important task for the development in the coming few years. And she's really focusing on the new territory, which is the northern part of Hong Kong, next to Shenzhen's SAR. And hopefully in the coming years and couple of decades, housing projects will be very rapidly developed, providing more units for the people.
We see that the Hong Kong SAR government has been talking and working toward a more diversified culture, for example, with the West Kowloon Cultural District. We also see it's trying to emphasize on innovation with some of the innovation experiment zones. And also we see it's trying to work on the area with the mainland, for example, in Guangdong and the Greater Bay Area. So how do we see all these ideas coming together so far after several years of Hong Kong SAR government's work? Mr. Ma, briefly.
Well, I think the cultural part is very much so internal within Hong Kong. There's a West Kowloon Cultural Center that's been built. It's been there for about a year or so. It has a special theater for Qu, which is Chinese opera. And there has been performance there.
It's not just the center, it's actually a whole area in which is dedicated to different kinds of culture, modern art, performance art, or traditional Chinese art. It very different. It's bringing Hong Kong with more wonderful cultural identities in a way. But go ahead, Mr. Ma.
Yeah, so it is being tagged or identified as an East we meet West sort of a cultural hub. So I still have to see that there would be interactions and different types of performance in that cultural theater in the days to come.
But same question to you, Mr. Gao. How do you see those ideas being put together and implemented?
Well, first of all, I would say up to July the 1st, 2020, the big problem for Hong Kong was chaos and lack of stability because of quite a few people in Hong Kong, very much agitated. They bash out on the territory, attacking government entities, attacking innocent people, etc. Great turmoil in Hong Kong for almost 2 years. I think with stability being reinstituted for Hong Kong after the enactment of the national security law, people have greater confidence in the peace and stability and security for Hong Kong. And I think Hong Kong really need to get its act together to solve major problems of housing, jobs for the younger generation, and also very rapid transition of the economy, because if Hong Kong idles for too long, then the rest of the Greater Bay Area will really leap forward ahead of Hong Kong, and Hong Kong may lose a lot of its competitive advantages. So it is the time for Hong Kong to get its acts together, to seize the moment, to very much integrate with the rest of the Greater Bay Area and rest of China's mainland, and to shine and excel once again as a very bright and brilliant city, very well suited to do business.
Well, Mr. Ma, do you see Hong Kong will be able to get its act together quickly with efficiency?
Yes, of course.
There's
I
a
mean,
lot of
after-
debates still happening
yes.
going on in Hong
Yes.
Kong.
Yes, well, the implementation of national security law, together with the upcoming Article 23 legislation, which is the legislation the Hong Kong Legislative Council has to pass, and after passing of that legislation, it will complete the picture of the enactment of all the national security laws, and that would fulfill our constitutional duty under our basic law to enact legislation to protect national security. That was the first issue that the policy address dealt with. And of course, you have also just mentioned the development of the northern metropolis, which is very important with respect to the linkage with the Greater Bay Area, and very importantly, with the Shanghai area, which is the extension of a Hong Kong extension of Hong Kong, which will implement Hong Kong's style of management and hopefully some sort of government in there.
Lawrence Ma, Victor Liao Zhikai, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching.